So, uh, in terms of the movie Soylent Green, which I still think is a fantastic movie, very well done. I mean, obviously, everyone thinks it's kind of campy, but it's the most people kind of do this whole looking at things from our perspective because it seems a little bit campy and over the top because you couldn't do that today without it looking bad. Whereas back then, it was very edgy, avant-garde, and some people do and some people don't know. The movie Soylent Green is actually based on a book called Make Room, Make Room by Harry Harrison, and some interesting things in there. So, I mean, if I'm not going to recap the movie, if you haven't seen it, you should. Um, if you haven't seen it and you're thinking of seeing it, and for some bizarre reason you don't know what the plot is, stop this, go watch the movie, and then come back and listen to this. Because yeah, so we're gonna spoil away. So make room, make room. It's interesting. I mean, a lot of the elements that are in the book appear in the movie, but they did a lot of stuff different. Uh, and this is a good example of where the movie is actually far better than the book. Interestingly enough, Make Room, the book, is essentially a uh, pro abortion creed or screed. Uh, the reason why everything's so overpopulated in both the book and the movie is because abortion has been banned and family planning has been banned, so everyone's just having kids. This doesn't really come out in the movie, but in the book, they pretty much grab you by the back of the head and smack your head against face against the table several times to make sure that you really know why this is all happening. So I guess talk a little bit about what his concerns were, and I guess talk a little bit about the differences of what's different about the book versus the movie, and then maybe a little bit on why the predictions aren't remotely close to true. Okay, so if you read the book, I mean, you literally have several points where the character Saul is lecturing on this is why we got to this point because uh, people can't have abortions, so there's too many babies. The book starts essentially in 1999 and ends in 2000. So it's a change of the millennium type book. The movie itself is in 2022. Hey, it sounds familiar. So Soylent Green, the book is predicting that the population of New York City in the year 2000 is going to be 35 million. In the book, they predict, or excuse me, in the movie, they predict it to be 40 million. Currently, in our year, it is shy of 9 million. So, off by quite a bit. Interestingly, for their national population, because the book ends with uh, New Year's Eve in Times Square at the dawn of 2000. And one of the things they announced that the population is 334 million, which is roughly close to what it is now. So they were about 22 years off on the scale of things. So we'll talk a little bit about the whole population thing in a bit. So what's different about the book? Well, it is a police detective story, and that part they follow. Some names change. The main character's name is Andy instead of Thorn. Uh, the big issues in the book are uh, essentially they're running into a lot of problems. One of the background issues is that the farmers in upstate New York are continuously attacking the aqueduct that's bringing water to New York City, and that's causing a problem because they need fresh water for their crops. Uh, the character Saul ends up his death is very different than the movie. What happens is there's this mass protest breaks out, trying to convince the government to adopt family planning, and the government's against family planning, and so there's this mass protest about family planning, and a riot breaks out. Saul gets trampled in the riot, gets injured, essentially gets pneumonia, and kind of dies over about a 1 month period. The prime central theme, where they're talking about the idea of people being converted to a food item, is not particularly central to the book. It's something that comes up, and when it does, people are kind of like, oh yeah, we kind of guessed that, because there's no way, because Soylent, where the word comes from, is they are actually a form of steak that's being served, that's supposedly made of soy and lentils, and and people kind of guess that, well, there is, things aren't going well enough for us to be able to be making food off that. So that's not really that's not the big plot point, which is interesting. I thought so. Obviously, the movie did a lot better on that. So yeah, Saul doesn't have his very dramatic death that he does in the movie. It's essentially kind of a slow, lingering bow out. Uh, Part of the the book revolves around a petty criminal that during the riot breaks into one of the high-end stores and steals a bunch of these Soylent steaks and is selling them on the black market. And he ends up getting into a high-end apartment building similar to what happens in the movie, but he isn't a hitman like the movie. He's just a petty thief. He ends up being surprised by the person who's the fill-in for Santini from the movie. This guy's name is Big Mike, and he's just some kind of other underworld figure. And the petty thief ends up killing him, and then the main police character is tasked with digging things up. Eventually, and there's a lot of chasing around, and they kind of give you a feel for how awful things are in the city, and there's always something kind of brewing at the edges of things, uh, like like there's like elder riots where the old people go out. They can't make enough on the pensions they're getting from the government, so they want to go back to work, and the government's preventing them from going to work. Farmers, I mentioned before, just all kinds of things kind of brewing all over the place. People upset about the way things are going. So the detective story goes through, and it's really not as much trying to figure out what's going on in the big world. It's just tracking him down so that they can walk you through the city so you can see the different things that are going on there. And they end up having the thief is trying to make a run for it, and the policeman ends up shooting him and killing him, causes him some problems. The policeman, who, and similar to the movie, hooks up with Cheryl, who is Big Mike's concubine, and she gets booted out of the apartment at the end of the month because her contract's up there. She ends up living with Saul and the policeman for a while, and she gets upset. She doesn't like living there because she's used to living in luxury, and she eventually just kind of wanders off and finds some new rich dude to hang with. The policeman gets demoted for essentially a shooting that he can't back up as being necessary, and he ends up being busted from detective to being back in uniform. And the book ends with him policing Times Square because they're afraid a riot might break out on New Year's Eve because there's a lot of end of the millennial things happening, and in the end, nothing really happens. It kind of peters out. So this is an example where, in fact, the movie is far better than the book. Uh, but they could not have made the movie without the book because you can definitely see there's lots of elements of the book that make it into the movie. They just did a better job rearranging them and then taking storylines and altering them and making them better. So, I mean, you could probably go the rest of your life without reading Make Room, but if you go, you definitely should see the movie Soylent Green if you haven't. But now it's been spoiled, so I warned you. Okay, so and like it's kind of interesting in the book here. When we get back with all the ranting and raving about family planning and population control, there is a whole big section in the back called suggestions for further reading, and essentially it's all uh, books about population explosion and various papers that they're essentially trying to get you to read because when this book came out in 1970, they knew for a fact that by the time we hit the year 2000, we'd have so many people that we wouldn't be able to feed ourselves, and things would be absolute misery. But they're wrong. Now, one of the things I don't fully understand, and maybe if I did a full I kind of, what I did was I skimmed the book. It's been a long time since I've read it. They might explain, there's essentially a big discrepancy between um, the population of the country versus the population of New York City. So essentially, they're off. Essentially, New York City is a quarter of the population now of what they predicted to be in the book and the movie. A quarter. Yet in the book, they're 20 years off from the national population. So I don't understand why. So whatever extrapolation he made is either completely wrong, or there's some point in the book where essentially they're routing people into the cities and they weren't really clear on that, and that's a possibility that I'm not picking up on. But yeah, I could see cramming 35 to 40 million people in the area of New York City would make everybody freaking miserable. So that would be kind of crazy. And it may have something to do with they may have been under the impression that because one of the big problems everybody who predicts population problems does is they always assume that our food output's going to remain exactly the same, or it's going to be um, a linear projection where it's like, well, we're making this much now and we can only make this much more. But the thing is we do keep finding ways to keep uh, increasing production. So that might be the glitch. They may have, in the book, they may have routed people into the cities in order to free up farmland because they assume that you're going to need uh, massive amounts of land to even feed, a population of 344 million. Fear not, my friends. I have not picked up coffee as a habit. It's tea. So, um, I've been talking a little bit of population has been popping up in some of these videos because we have a really misguided idea right now that these population trends that were predicted in the 70s and essentially have been predicted back since Malthus in the late 1700s have always been wrong. Uh, they're always predicting gloom and doom on it. And since most people have heard nothing but population is going to get bigger and we absolutely have to have problems because of it, they can't get their brain around the idea that the trend can change, and it appears to be changing. We essentially, China may have hit max population within the last, like within a few years ago, and that they're going to be on the downward slope from this point on. South Korea appears to be on the downward slope. Russia has been on the downward slope. Japan is one of the oldest countries on the face of the planet in terms of demographics. So they can't possibly maintain their population over the long term. One of the too few countries in the Western world, the United States and France, are the only ones who have decent demographics at this time. And there are a handful of African countries that can boast the same positive demographic growth, where they're essentially having a slow growth as opposed to decline. So I guess analyzing the fact that these people continuously come up with the wrong answer is the first step to saying, well, okay, if they're constantly getting the wrong answer, could it be true what I'm saying is that we're actually in danger of facing a population implosion? So I can understand why that's hard for people to understand, because it's the exact opposite of what we've been being told. But if we can at least get our heads around the fact that all the predictions so far have been off by huge amounts, and that the results don't match what the worst case scenarios indicate. Like I said, this book is showing a population of 344 million in 2000, a population we roughly have now, and clearly we're not facing the issues they're facing. I mean, our biggest problem is obesity, not a shortage of food. So, food for thought, I guess. So, thank you for spending time with me tonight. If you like this video, please smash the like button. If you have some comments on it, love to hear your comments. I often answer your comments, and if you give me something that's too big to answer, I might turn it into another video. If you think there's somebody out there who might like my content, or specifically this one, please share. And if you're liking what you're hearing, subscribe. Helps me out a lot. All right, hope to see you again in a future video.